Welcome to the Spiggle Law Firm podcast, where we help people who've been fired or afraid that they might be, and we talk about cutting edge employment law issues in the news. I'm Tom Spiggle, founder of the Spiggle Law Firm, and I am thrilled today to have an attorney in my office, Zach Amon, who is a repeat guest and always has some really interesting things to talk about. But before we turn to Zach, just a little bit of legalese. Because those darn lawyers. This podcast doesn't create an attorney-client relationship with you, the listener, nor is it intended to be specific legal advice for your case. If you need that and you got it, you should go hire a lawyer. And with that, Zach, what are we going to talk about today?
Sure. Well, Tom, a lot of the conversations that we have usually revolve around some aspect of sports, and that's true again today. Recent news story is the Dartmouth men's basketball team voting to unionize, which is very interesting step as far as student athletes and getting recognition that they deserve, and all those fights that have come up recently. So just by way of background. They voted to unionize on Tuesday, so just a couple of days ago. They voted to unionize prior to and asked Dartmouth to voluntarily recognize their union. Dartmouth obviously declined to do so, saying that they're not employees, so they can't unionize. So the team then went to the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB. Dartmouth asked the NLRB to rule that they were not employees. But then last month, the NLRB's regional director that was overseeing the case ruled that there was an employer-employee relationship between Dartmouth and the players, because the players performed work that benefited the school by way of publicity or receiving donations from alumna, that the players were compensated non-monetarily, and that the school exercises a significant amount of control over the players whenever they're doing their job duties in playing basketball. So the regional director found that the players were employees under the NLRA, and so that set up the vote for the players to elect to unionize. Dartmouth again tried to push this off a little bit. They first tried to delay the vote by waiting for the process to play out, and then they specifically asked that the regional director's decision be overturned. Those motions were denied, so that set up the vote on Tuesday, where they voted 13-2 to unionize. So they are now they're official, and moving forward with those moving forward in the process. So I thought that this was really interesting. Just the story by itself is interesting, but where it goes from here and the questions that it opens up are also very interesting to me. Dartmouth raised what I think is a good point in saying, does it make sense to allow current players who will not be students in 3 to 5 years be able to vote to make this choice for students who aren't even on a roster yet? They're still in high school. So I thought that was an interesting question. Some other interesting things that will have to be worked out. What happens with a team if the team strikes? Like, what does that look like? A big tool that a union has in its pocket is the ability to strike labor. But what does that look like for a basketball team? A basketball season is pretty short. How many of those athletes are going to be willing to strike for very long? Especially whenever they're foregoing a chance to play in front of pro scouts for some of them. How long does the strike last? Would they lose a scholarship by electing not to perform? I think that would be questionable for some of the players. And then, what is the benefit of a strike in that? How much damage does it cause to the employer? In this case, it would be the school. For your blue blood championship programs across the country, they bring in a significant amount of revenue for those schools. But not all schools have as much revenue generating potential, and not all teams have as many revenue generating potential either. So, from sport to sport, from school to school, the effect of a strike may be very, very different from school to school. And then the last thing that I thought was interesting as far as is employee benefits. So medical, labor, dental, any ERISA benefits, any retirement. What does that look like for an employee that is only going to be there for 3 to 5 years? And then if there's any Title IX implications, I know that that's kind of going down a whole other wormhole, but still, just this one seemingly small decision opens up a whole lot of questions that I think are really going to be interesting to see play out over the next couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating topic. Just this, we've seen this issue pop up before, with student athletes, because they, at least in respect to these, like you said, these sort of keystone sports, they're big revenue generators for the school. And players for years have been like, hey, what about us? And, for until pretty recently, the schools were like, well, hey, you're an athlete, you get what you get, and
You're a
that's
student
really,
athlete. Student comes first, I think, is the official NCAA
yes, exactly.
toe
While they're
line. So
cashing the checks and, building new facilities and all that. I think just to set it up for our listeners who aren't in the weeds on employment law quite like we are, so that the National Labor Relations Board covers really all employers, but I would say its main focus, but where we hear about it most is in the area of unions. There are all kinds of regulations and laws about unionizing and voting and when you can unionize and how those campaigns are conducted, and the NLRB is very much involved with that. They are also, they also play a role with non-union employers. In particular, they protect the right of workers not only to unionize but to what they call concerted activity. Right? They can
mhm.
talk about wages, they can talk about work conditions, and employers. It is illegal under the National Labor Relations Act. It is illegal for an employer to interfere with that. So I think this will be a fascinating topic with sports. It also shows the NLRB being much more muscular in its definition of what's an employee, which could affect other employers, not just sports related employers. And, the Department of Labor, as their new regulations are taking effect, I believe the 16th of March, which is coming up, which also liberalized the rules for when somebody who works for a company should be classified as an employee versus an independent contractor or some other kind of relationship. So this is just another outgrowth of what is really, a fascinating and continuing development.
Right. I agree. I think, you mentioned the timing of it all. And I was thinking about this recently, the timing of the Dartmouth situation. March Madness is right around the corner. And, who knows who's going to be in the tournament, but I know that this will be a storyline throughout the tournament, regardless of who's playing in it. And I think that it's going to expose a lot more people to the idea of unions, to the idea of what the NLRB does, and sort of more the process of unionizing. So it's interesting to see, when it plays out as to how it's playing out in the media as well. So, you have the big March Madness tournaments coming up. Obviously, college sports with NIL has been a topic of conversation more recently that more people are aware of. And, I would be remiss without mentioning the fact that it is an election year. And so that obviously has some determinations on what the NLRB does in the future. And so it's
Sure.
interesting that all these stories are kind of coming to a head now at a time where a lot of people are getting more exposed to it at the exact time where they might be able to do something about it.
Yeah.
So just an interesting side sociological aspect to it, I guess, that
Yeah.
I
I think
found
it's a great
fascinating.
point because, what happens in the election will probably dramatically affect this very issue, right? I mean, one of the reasons that we are seeing, these changes is that we have a Democratic, the Biden administration, which is very pro labor, And they've got their appointees in both the National Labor Relations Board and certainly the Department of Labor. If the Republicans win, in November, then we could see this whipsaw back the other way, right? Because we're going to have somebody else who is, Secretary of the Department of Labor, and we're going to have, National Labor Relations Board is a little different. You have to have board members appointed, but they're going to have a different view of this because it has traditionally been, and these lines sometimes get muddied, but more conservatives like a more liberalized definition of what, who can be an employee, because it's employers like to have the freedom to classify, people, independent
Right.
contractors versus employer, for all the reasons that you mentioned. There are a lot of things that come along with employee status. Not only are there tax implications, but ERISA benefits. All the anti-discrimination laws apply to an employee. They don't apply generally, at least in the federal law, to independent contractors. So it's a big deal for employers. And I think it's a great point, too, that we've sort of seen in some sectors kind of a resurgence in union activity. I mean, for years, the unions were just kind of on the downward slope of power and participation. And these past couple of years, as we've seen the labor market tighten, and with COVID, they've got a lot more power, and we've seen a lot more unionizing activity. So I think you're right. Like, this is going to put this in front of an audience who, we're not talking about cars or steel mills or manufacturing where one thinks about unions. We're talking about a basketball team, right? So I think it's going to raise the profile for people. What they think about it, who knows, but it is going to raise the profile. I think the important thing really is that the Tar Heels win March Madness. That's not to be partisan about it, but go Heels.
I haven't I haven't even thought about a bracket yet. I look forward to it, but it's not, I know the calendar just turned March, so I have a little bit of time to figure it out.
Yeah.
So, been paying attention a lot more to, I guess, the side stories than the actual game that's going to be played, but I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah. It's going to be fun. I think this is a great topic, Zach. Anything else we haven't covered, or something else you want to talk about?
No, I think that pretty much covers it for now. I love talking sports, so it's always interesting to be able to relate it back to what we do, and make it maybe a little bit easier to digest for some of the listeners who can relate.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And we've seen a lot of employment law issues in the sports world, which you've been good to highlight for us. It's a fascinating, conjunction there, joining of, the sports and the employment issues, and it's serious stuff. So I appreciate you highlighting it for us.